afraid of the dark.
I live in a small town about 15 miles from New York City. It gradually merges with another small town and then becomes the big city itself. My life is quiet and peaceful. I have a girlfriend, an apartment, a car, and a salary that I'm happy with. I used to be skeptical about anything paranormal or supernatural. I believed that in the remote forests of America, in the ancient caves and mountains, or in the depths of lakes, there could be something mystical and old. But in cities, in civilization, no, cities create their own demons. We have our fair share of maniacs and psychopaths. Anyway, I had an argument with my girlfriend, Kate. It was a stupid reason, something like an hour of silence, but both of us said things that were hard to forget. So I decided to spend the night in my garage. It's a good size. My father used to take care of it, and since I'm a bit of a neat freak, it's always clean. All the tools are organized on shelves and in drawers, and there's a workbench. My car is covered with a tarp, and there's a small couch just the right size for me. The garage has lights, a lamp, and an overhead light. There's even a cabinet for small items, a sink with a jug, and a bucket. It was a Saturday evening, and I didn't feel like going out with friends, as the argument had left a bitter taste. I didn't want to drown my sorrows in alcohol or distract myself with a party, so I grabbed a few things and a warm blanket. When I arrived at the garage, the neighbors greeted me with waves and questions about my well-being. The garage cooperative is located not far from the town center, with about 40 garages in it. The people there can be divided into 3 categories: pensioners, my peers, and young people. Everyone usually keeps to themselves, although sometimes one of the young guys will rev up their newly bought old Jupiter or Java, and the whole cooperative will hear it. But there are no fights or drunken parties. It's a quiet, boring province. I settled in for the night, making myself comfortable on the couch. I had dinner at a nearby restaurant and bought a bottle of water and some cookies from the store. Around 9 p.m. I got ready for bed, as we are not allowed to stay in the cooperative after that time. Half an hour later, I quietly climbed over the fence into the woods behind the cooperative. The dogs, who are usually tied up near my garage, just wagged their tails and rested their heads on their paws as I passed by. I quietly opened the door to my garage, slipped inside, and closed the door behind me. I turned on the lamp, spread out my warm blanket, and pulled on a thick sweater. October nights can be chilly. I grabbed a book and snuggled up to read. At around 11 p.m., I heard the voice of the watchman, Simon.
"White Katie Seamer, get to your kennels,"
he called out. After his command, I heard the soft clinking of metal bowls and the patter of dog paws. Simon called out again.
"Quiet. Old Katie over there is in her 5th year, and she's still as dumb as ever."
There was a discontented growl, and Simon said,
"We'll go to the kennels. It's brighter there. Old Katie and White are already having their dinner. I'll put you on a leash too, or you'll disappear into the darkness."
I shrugged and turned to the other side, continuing to read my book. About 10 minutes later, I started to wonder why the guard dogs needed to be leashed at night. During the day, it made sense, but at night, it seemed unnecessary. After all, the only people who came around at night were those looking for easy pickings. Shaking my head at the mystery, I continued reading. As midnight approached, I was dozing off when I heard a metallic clink outside, followed by the sound of something hitting the metal of the garage. I listened intently. For about 20 minutes, I heard the sound of stones being thrown, occasionally mixed with distant laughter. I began to feel uneasy, especially when the guard dogs in the far corner of the cooperative started barking. I got up from the couch and approached the door, pressing my ear against it to listen.
"Are you sure?"
asked a young voice, one that sounded like it belonged to a boy of about 14 years old.
"Yeah, it's definitely there,"
replied another young voice, this one rougher and more assertive.
"It's probably just some old crabapple that can't even play."
The first voice scoffed. I heard 2 deep breaths, and then the sound of something scraping against metal right next to the garage. The dogs howled in response, and a plaintive cry rang out.
Esther, please open the door.
Begged a timid voice.
Open the door, or we'll get it.
Threatened the other voice.
Please, mister, open the door.
The timid voice pleaded again, now sounding desperate. There was a banging on the door of the garage next to mine, and then a scream.
Open up, you old coot.
Shouted the assertive voice. The sound of palms slapping against metal grew louder, and the timid voice joined in, pleading.
Help somebody, please.
Despite the absence of dog barks, the voices sounded like they were being torn apart by wild beasts. After a series of death cries, everything went quiet.
You should have opened the door.
Accused a commanding voice, sounding like it was scolding its companion.
Yeah, but we didn't.
Came the response.
We could have let them out, but no one did. You would have torn them apart anyway.
The commanding voice continued.
Yeah, but now we have to kill them.
The other voice said, sounding resigned. I clutched the door handle, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I knew I was in danger. I heard a laugh behind me, and I yanked the door open and ran out of the garage. In front of me stood the owner of the timid voice. He was about 12 years old, and his shorts and t-shirt were torn to shreds. Half of his neck was missing, and it was a miracle that his head was still attached. His ankles and wrists were chewed up, and one cheek hung loosely, revealing his teeth. Scratches and bite marks covered his body.
Run!
He whispered hoarsely.
Run to the kennels, tell them. Tell them it's not their fault.
I screamed and took off running toward the kennels. I could feel something jumping on my back and I stumbled, falling to the ground. Something bit into my shoulder, and as I rolled on the ground, I realized it was the timid boy, transformed into a monster. He was stronger than he looked, and I couldn't break free.
Cover your face with your hands.
He shouted, his voice now coming from my left. I did as he said, covering my face with my hands and running toward the kennels. Suddenly there was a gunshot, and the thing on my back let go. I felt small, painful bites on my hands and arms, and I screamed louder.
Lie down and play dead.
The boy shouted.
Play dead or I'll rip your throat out.
I dropped to the ground, and the boy continued.
God damn it, man. You're bleeding all over the place. Eyes, get his eyes.
Not the eyes.
I heard the commanding voice protest.
We need them to see.
Then get his legs.
The timid boy shouted.
We'll take his legs.
I felt hands grabbing my ankles, and then there were more gunshots. The thing on my back howled, and I heard the sound of retreating footsteps.
We'll get you next time.
The commanding voice called out. I lay there, crying, my hands and shoulder burning with pain.
We need to call an ambulance.
Said a voice above me.
I'll call the boss. Hang in there, buddy.
I mumbled something about my shoulder, hands, and eyes being in pain, and the watchman, Simon, said,
You're lucky to be alive. We'll get you to a hospital.
I woke up in the hospital the next morning. No one from my family or friends knew I was there yet. A stranger stood by my bed, and when he saw me looking around fearfully, he spoke quietly.
Don't worry, it's not just the garages. These things appear rarely, but it happens. You're lucky to be alive. You'll need to get shots for rabies, but you'll be fine. Good thing you were wearing a thick sweater and you covered your face and hands. The shots will hurt, but you'll live.
I noticed bandages on his hands and asked about them.
Oh, this.
He said, holding up his hands.
I got bit by a dog once. It's nothing. The guard's shotgun was loaded with salt, so that helped. It's not easy to hit a moving target in the dark, but he managed to get the thing off you. You're lucky.
I looked at him, and he continued.
Are you sure you're okay up here?
He tapped his head.
You didn't get a concussion or anything, did you? It's just... Well, this kind of thing is rare. It happened about 10 years ago with a couple of kids who snuck into the garages at night. The guard back then was drunk and asleep, and the dogs were hungry. The kids couldn't have predicted that. Someone was in the garages. Someone saw them running from the dogs, but they didn't do anything. Maybe it was a maniac, or maybe they just didn't care. The guard didn't let the kids in, and the dogs tore them apart.
I listened, tears streaming down my face. The man put his arm around me and said,
It's okay. These things happen. When the cooperative bought the place, we had to make some rules about overnight stays. The dogs get angry sometimes, like they're taking revenge. It's rare that we catch anyone, but you were unlucky. Go ahead and sue if you want, but I doubt it'll do any good.
He stood up and rubbed the back of his neck.
If you need to talk or have any complaints, here's my number.
He handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it and left. I tried to sleep, but was soon interrupted by a doctor who needed to know what had happened. I mumbled something about a bulldog and a drunk friend who had shot the dog. The doctor gave me a strange look, but handed me some prescriptions and referrals anyway. The pain and shots stopped after a couple of weeks and the bites healed. I sold the garage, and when the new owner opened it, he found it covered in dirt and torn to pieces. I met with the owner of the cooperative a few times to calm my nerves and convince myself that I wasn't crazy. The bites, by the way, didn't look like bulldog bites at all. They were definitely made by a human child.